Gabriela Díaz de Sabatés is assistant professor in Humanities, History, and Social Sciences at Columbia College, Chicago. She is originally from Buenos Aires, has lived in Providence, Rhode Island, Manhattan, Kansas, and moved to Chicago in 2017 together with her husband, who is here today, Marcelo, and her daughter, Sofia. Dr. Díaz de Sabatés has a BA in clinical psychology from the University of Buenos Aires, an MED from Harvard, and a PhD from Kansas State University. Her areas of interest and research include gender, identity, migrations, gender violence, women in education, Latino and Latin American studies. She presents at conferences nationally and internationally and has published articles on Latinx women, college education, gender roles, and migrations. At Columbia College, Gabriela teaches Introduction to Gender, Women and Sexuality Studies, Women's Life Stories, Women in U.S. Society, and Introduction to Latino and Latin American Studies. She is the minor in Latino and Latin American Studies coordinator and advisor for the Renegade Student Dance, which I didn't realize. Yeah, I'm actually at Columbia College also, and I'm the volleyball advisor. So go figure. Okay, so if you would, please help me welcome Gabriela.
Oh, yeah, okay. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to being here, joining all of you in this very cold March morning. Something is going on, so my voice comes and goes, so please bear with me. I do understand that after 29 years in this country, I still have an accent. I mean, I don't hear it, but people say so. So if for some reason there is something that I'm saying, also it's actually, it's a very intense time for work. So sometimes when I'm kind of tired, and usually over the weekend, we speak Spanish at home. That's my first language. Second one is Italian. English came third, but now I think that is taking over. But if there is anything that I'm mispronouncing or you don't know what I'm not only what I'm saying, but what I'm trying to say, feel free to let me know, okay? So I want to thank the Ethical Humanist Society of Chicago for having me here today, and Patty McKenzie, who has been the person who brought this up to me, this opportunity to me. So thank you so much, appreciate it. As Patty said, I was born in Buenos Aires, in Argentina. So we lived in a huge, very cosmopolitan city. My husband and I came to the United States many years ago to do our PhDs, never thinking about at all staying. I mean, we are both from family of immigrants, Italians and Spaniards. So we never thought, and no one expected us to leave the country. We didn't either, but one thing led to another, and it's been 29 years that we are here. Our daughter, we have a daughter, Sofia. Sofia is a biologist, but she's working for an ONG. She came to visit us from Kansas City, came to help us with the move to Chicago, fell in love with Chicago. Next thing you know, she's living in Chicago. She moved in. So it's the three of us, a very small family. Today I will read my document. That's something that, in academia is something pretty common to do, so sorry, it's just my training. And it's Women's Life Stories, Reinventing Our Identities. This has to do, I've worked on identities for quite some time, because in a way, in Buenos Aires, Argentina, I was Gabriela Díaz, and then I got married, so Gabriela Díaz Sabatés. But it was only when I came to this country and I came down that airplane in Providence, Rhode Island, that teeny tiny plane, that I encountered people calling me a Latina woman, and I had no idea what that meant. This is something that is used in the United States, but it's by no means a way of talking about ourselves in Latin American countries. So this has been a task, something that I embrace to do, to find out what does it mean to be Latina in my case, and what aspects of that identity that is assigned to me I decide to embrace, and which parts I can model into that will show who I am, really. So it has been a process, and it has taken quite some time. So just for you to know that a large part of my work is related, intimately related, to my interest in knowing more about identities. So this is a quote from Dan McAdams, a psychologist. Life stories do not simply reflect personality. They are personality, or more accurately, they're important parts of personality, along with other parts like dispositional traits, goals, and values. Introduction. This presentation is part of a larger and more ambitious book project on feminism, state-generated violence, and gender. Its main argument is that gender oppression is embedded within the very fabric of social structure in almost all societies, and that it has been so for centuries. Gender oppression is systematic and systemic, and it is the main reason why justice and equality historically evade women just because of their gender and just because we're women. This presentation today is a first step in the identification and analysis of those gender-powered structures entrenched within the social structure of Argentina's culture, through the life narratives of a woman named Dr. Diana Mafia, an intellectual and philosopher from Argentina that discusses gender violence embedded in Argentinian society between 1970s and the end of the 20th century, including the last military dictatorship that Argentina suffered from 1976 to 1983. That was the last dictatorship we had in the country, and it was especially bloody and cruel. Her testimony allows for the analysis of how patriarchal power, rooted in the very structure of society, affects and determines women's gender roles. Dr. Mafia has worked since very early in her life toward gender equity in Argentina, in academia, and within the judiciary system. She has a PhD in philosophy from the University of Buenos Aires, and currently is the director of the Autonomic City of Buenos Aires Judiciary Council's Gender Observatory. In this work, I sought to identify not only those patriarchal structures embedded in the process of generating knowledge, especially in academia, but also highlight the necessary work that feminists, such as Dr. Mafia, have done to subvert those structures and generate social change towards gender equity. Some background, relevance of life narratives. So why do I work, or many of us work on life narratives? In this study, I use oral narrative as a research method. It is important to note that the experiential knowledge that women have is legitimate, appropriate, and critical to be able to understand and analyze those contexts where different types of gender oppression intersect, as well as to understand movements of cultural transgression and change. Finnish sociologist, I'm going to try to pronounce this, Hevariken, Korhonen, and Mihanen, in 2006, in studying narrative inquiry, stated that over the last 3 decades, the concept of narrative has traveled successfully from literature into several new disciplines, such as social sciences, law, psychology, education, theology, and health studies, among others. Narrative methods have proliferated in many fields. In the US, psychological theorists such as Jerome Bruner emphasized the storied nature of human lives and human conduct. Bruner was one of the cognitive psychology movement pioneers in the US that was interested not only in how an organism responded to stimuli, but specifically the organism's interpretation of such stimulus. Bruner advocated for a more holistic understanding of the mind and its production of cognition, culminating his work in the development of a theory of individuals' narrative construction of reality. In this theory, Bruner affirmed the importance of understanding how the mind makes sense of the world in a narrative form think about it. Think about how you make sense of your daily happenings and how you tell your stories from now to the past. Dan McAdams, a psychology professor at Northwestern University, said that life stories, with what I started, I will reiterate this, do not simply reflect personality, they are personality. Or more accurately, they are important parts of our personality. McAdams wrote extensively about the importance that oral narratives have in the life of individuals. He argued that oral narratives create and sustain a person's internalized and evolving life story, wherein the individual reconstructs their past and imagines the future to provide their life with some degree of unity, of organization. McAdams developed a life story model of adult identity where people living in modern societies start organizing their lives in narrative terms in late adolescence and young adulthood. Individuals create internalized and evolving life stories that serve to reconstruct the past and anticipate the future in ways that provide their lives with some degree of unity and purpose. In an interview done of McAdams by The Atlantic Online in August 2015, he stated that in the realm of narrative psychology, a person's life story is not like a Wikipedia biography of the facts and events in life, but rather it is the way a person integrates those facts and events internally, picks them apart, and weaves them back together to make meaning. This narrative becomes a form of identity in which the things someone chooses to include in their story and the way they tell their story can both reflect and shape who this person is. A life story doesn't just say what happened, it says why it is important, why it means for who the person is, for who they will become, and for what happens next. Therefore, constructing and internalizing a life story is at the center of an individual's sense of identity. Further, McAdams argued that the construction of a life story is always done within a specific socio-cultural and political context. The power of conversation and social contextualization are essential for learning narrative skills, shaping identity expectations, and formulating meaningful stories for one's life, reinforcing the powerful significance and of social context. Narrative identity is always contextualized in culture. And I'm thinking about all of you here together, different generations, and having conversations on a weekly basis about what happens, what's coming, how you live your lives, what has happened to you, during the week, et cetera, and how that becomes part of your identities within a social context. Connecting life stories with gender, Holling affirmed that life narratives allow researchers access to women's direct accounts of their lived experiences while identifying the ideologies and beliefs that are shaped by these experiences, while contextualizing these narratives within the societies they live in. For example, the life narratives of a Latina college student in the US not only speak about her individual experience, but also contextualize Latinas in general identities and experiences as ethnic minorities. In this regard, Holling asserts that via life narratives, Latinas' voices underscore their strength and tenacity in challenging forms of their experienced social and institutional oppressions as inhibiting their growth. Latinas' life narratives provide a first-hand view into not only how they maintain their own gender and ethnic identity in a predominantly white society, but also how they construct and redefine their gender and ethnic selves in relation to the environment. It is only when Latinas name their own experiences, give voice to their own world, and affirm themselves as legitimate social agents that they transform the meaning of those experiences. This approach challenges educational norms and moves away from traditional cultural deficit and assimilation frameworks that attempt to interpret the experiences of Latina based on the experiences of males or white women. Intellectual and experiential women's knowledge is a source of strength and power transmitted via stories, family anecdotes, biographies, and life narratives. Oppressed groups have always known that learning about, preserving their stories and traditions, and transmitting them onto the coming generations are essential elements to their own survival and liberation. Now, coming back to women gender roles in Argentinian society. So now we are going back to not the Latinas in the US, but women in Argentina. Similarly to what Latina women experienced in the United States of America and in Latin America in general, because of their gender, women in Argentina have been historically subjected to oppressive discourses and social norms, which have silenced and discounted them from political and social participation and have obstructed their equal treatment under the law. In Argentina, women have been mentally and physically abused by military dictatorships, have been disappeared because of their political interests and participation, have been left aside from fundamental decision-making processes in the country, have been pushed and kept in lower social strata due to neoliberal economic practices, and have been denied equal rights just because of their gender. Some historically and socially accepted ideas that have justified women's unequal treatment in society, always considered less than heterosexual males, have not only been the result of military dictatorships, although military dictatorships have helped solidify women's secondary gender roles, but they have existed for centuries, woven in the fiber of the civil society, and are ferociously rooted in dominant social values. In Argentinian culture, misogyny is directly related to Marianismo, values primarily instilled by colonization and Catholicism, which valued women only when they are heterosexual, abnegated mothers, subservient to others, and submissive. Those accepted and expected gender roles for women are imposed through TV programming, commercials, songs, family's advice, tango lyrics, laws. As the lyrics of Joan Manuel Serrat, a Catalan songwriter, song goes, these expected gender roles are internalized daily with a warm breast milk and with every lullaby. In Argentina, women's oppression and subjugation to unequal and diminishing laws have been and continue to be alive and kicking. They have existed not only during times when the country was under military dictatorship, but also during democracy. It is important to note that it is not the intention of this presentation to equal military dictatorship and its flagrant violation of human rights with the rule of law, including constitutional rights of democracy, but to highlight that the dictatorship rule took to an extreme the misogynistic violence already existing in Argentina society. During the last military dictatorship, so 76 to 1983, women were inflicted broader repertoires of supplice with broader alternatives for suffering. Keeping women subjected to strict, subjugating gender roles was expected and further not only by the military power, but also by the very same groups that were opposed to the military. Dr. Dora Barrancos, a renowned sociologist and historian, indicates that many women were part of insurgent armed groups that operated before and during the military dictatorship, such as Montoneros, the Revolutionary People's Army, the Peronist Armed Forces, and the Liberation Armed Forces. Many times, women made up almost 50% of these organizations, but they were usually at the base positions of these groups and rarely participated in leadership roles. Within these groups, there was no consideration of women as autonomous and equal to men. Creating meaning backwards. Dr. Diana Mafia affirms that the meanings of actions are produced backwards, from present to past. This is to say that we, I quote, recover portions of our lives, events, and decisions and resignify them in such a way to make them fit the most current way in which we understand our life story. Unquote. For Dr. Mafia, the visit that renowned Argentinian feminist living in the US at the time, Maria Lugones, this woman paid a visit to Buenos Aires in 1985 with the intention to relocate in Buenos Aires. She had to leave the country because of dictatorship persecution. And for Diana Mafia, meeting Maria Lugones was crucial in bringing together her two passions, analytic philosophy and feminist thought. This is what Diana Mafia says. Maria Lugones traveled to Buenos Aires to give a job talk for a position in ethics at the University of Buenos Aires, right after the country returned to democracy. She talked about lesbian ethics, and the search committee was in disbelief. It was quite a commotion in a country that was coming out of a dictatorship. And Maria Lugones was coming from living in the US for 20 years, where in any university you could say, I'm a lesbian and an anarchist, and nobody would have a problem with it. But here, doing so was a weird thing. But since she came from an analytical background, she requested to give a talk at the Argentinian Society of Analytical Philosophy, SADAF, and her talk title was Philosophical Feminism. And that was the first time that I saw both words together in one sentence. Moreover, that I saw that feminism was used as a critic to philosophy. Therefore, SADAF was the first place in Argentina where a lecture on feminist philosophy was presented. SADAF received with open arms such theoretical development much earlier than any university in Argentina. Actually, this took place in SADAF 10 years earlier than any university in Buenos Aires. Such exposure to a new, unquote, such exposure to a new way of thinking and analyzing validated Mafia's questioning of the patriarchal production of knowledge, while opening a wide array of theoretical and practical possibilities for her. The year after Dr. Lugones visited Argentina, and with her support, Mafia gathered a wide range of thinkers and organized an international conference on feminist philosophy in Argentina. It's at this point when Mafia, alone initially, but later together with other Latin American and European feminists, started working on critical epistemology and feminist knowledge theory. Dr. Mafia and her thoughts about the process of social change. Mafia says that she's invested in telling stories of origins, of starting points, of beginnings. This is why a significant portion of what she discusses is directly related to her intellectual beginnings at the University of Buenos Aires. She talks about the difficulties and risks associated with studying at the university during the dictatorship. And she says, I quote, "A dictatorship marks a distancing from all kinds of literature because the intellectual shutdown of the country wasn't only political, but also a cultural one. The return to democracy was a flourishing of a wide diversity of ways of thinking and producing knowledge that was already happening underground. At the university, we read anything that came into our hands, however possible, because analytical philosophy was prohibited, censored, together with Marxism, because those two were considered the starting point of a political and social subversion, and thus terrorism. They were considered the two main philosophical sources of terrorism because they weren't against the natural order of things. I discovered SADAF halfway into my students at the university, and it was a clandestine organization. We had to hide in order to meet, and SADAF formed part of something called the University of the Catacombs, because we learned about and produced knowledge that went against the official education at the university. At the same time, I was increasingly reading more and more material on feminism related to social philosophy, and at some point I got my hands onto writings on feminism, feminist ethics, and feminist epistemology. These learnings allowed me to use feminism as a way to critique science, the making of it, and what happened to women in science. So Mafia talks about how she worked and thought in total isolation the majority of the time she studied at the University of Buenos Aires without access to having theoretical discussions with others at all, and therefore being unable to validate her theoretical points of view on feminism and knowledge production. I quote, she says, "To me, one of the most important times in my life have been the ability to put together philosophy, which is my academic background, with my feminism, which is my political position. This happened in parallel but not together. I, just one person, was studying philosophy and had this feminist investment in equal rights. But this investment was never used to criticize my theoretical education. For example, I never saw a woman philosopher in my 5 years at the university. And of course, feminist theory was not included among the contemporary philosophical theories that we studied. Even though I read feminist theory in the 80s, that theory was never academically valued." Unquote. To Dr. Mafia, as a philosopher and feminist, being able to have access to intellectual work on ethics and philosophical feminism while at the university facilitated her ability to analyze and suspect the lack of women making science and scientific theory. It also fostered her questioning about the absence of women in the production of all knowledge and what such an absence meant for the Argentinian society. For her intellectual formation, it was crucial to find a revolutionary space that facilitated not only the freedom to think openly, but also the possibility to discuss her findings with other colleagues. And she says, such thinking about the creation of knowledge, such feminist method of doubting it all, such critical aspect of feminism. Why were we, women, separated from the production of knowledge? Why there was such few women doing science? Why were there all kinds of arguments against women doing science? Thus, I began to get invested in all of these issues when I put feminism together with a philosophical perspective. Such doubting throws Dr. Mafia into a process of analysis where she takes a look at those spaces in society that women occupy, and also into a personal process of to generate for herself and other women spaces and possibilities for participation. And she says, I had a clear indication that we women could not stay at home any longer, that we were in need of political initiative to be part of the public sphere, to be represented in public spaces in society. So Mafia identifies an urgent need to generate spaces for meeting other women and produce feminist theory, so she decides to get started. She identifies a real need and decides to take action. During the 80s, and together with its creator, Dr. Leah Fletcher, a U.S. feminist visiting Argentina, Dr. Mafia works in the publication and diffusion of a feminist journal called Famine Area in Spanish, and included articles on feminist theory from different countries, especially Germany, Italy, France, and the US. These articles were woven together with articles on women in Latin America, feminist humor, feminist art, and a section on media critique related to the portrayal of women in media. This was a journal which was systematic, persistent, and was published for 20 years in a row. It generated space for the exchanging of ideas and collaboration among feminist theoreticians around the world. Now, at the same time that Mafia describes her trajectory, she denounces the lack of real and relevant spaces in society where women can participate. Such lack of relevant spaces is not just because, but it responds to a purposeful social, historical, and political decision to consider women less than men and therefore not equal participants in public spaces in society. In her beginnings working in feminist theory, Mafia goes beyond the unidimensional critique about gender oppression to which women are subjected, and together with Spanish feminist philosopher and essayist named Celia Amoros, takes upon an intersectional perspective of analysis of the patriarchal system. The analysis intersecting is a very simple concept, because you not only take gender into consideration, but also class, race, ethnicity, sexual identity, etc. Mafia proposes from direct social action the full insertion of women in the realm of labor, politics, and justice in her country. She proposes the creation and diffusion of feminist ideas and the generation of encuentros, which are gatherings in different forms at a national and international level, the full participation of women at the university level, and the creation of majors and degrees related to women, gender, and sexuality studies. Her testimony is not only about her personal life story, but as I stated above, a testimony on how her doing possesses a foundational importance, since she reinvents, names, structures, and remakes not only her personal identity, but also a collective identity. By doing so, she subverts patriarchal structures within Argentinian society to generate social change and gender inclusion. To conclude, as a culmination of this presentation, I would like to stress the important concept of that oral narratives structure individuals' identities. Life narratives make possible that the realities that women inhabit are known, recognized, and valued. These stories are critical elements that facilitate the transformation and conditions under which women live, and therefore change the very structure of societies. Women's testimonies are not only stories, they are foundational relevance, since they reinvent, recreate, name, and structure individual and collective identity. Thank you.
Just this past week, I saw a play called Abuelos. Okay. Is that grandmothers? Is that I don't do Spanish.
That was good.
And oh, thank you. And it was set in current day, but it was talking about the history in Argentina and as you said, the disappeared. Are you old enough to have known or be connected to, and where is it now, and just anything you can expand on that and explain it, because I was unfamiliar with it.
With the that's called Abuelas de Plaza de Mayo. Those are the grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo. Is the main it's the center of the city, and you have the government house, which is pink in Argentina. It's dark pink. So our like the White House. I'm sorry, like the White House, we have a pink house, and it's a very beautiful structure where you have the pink house, and then in the center you have the plaza. The how do you call it? The what? The square. Yeah, thank you. I can never. Okay, it's the main square, and you have. It's a small pyramid of freedom in the center. So what happened, I spent my whole adolescence doing military dictatorship. My high school and part of elementary school doing military dictatorship. And it's, when you live in dictatorship, you really, I don't know, when you're a kid, your parents strive for you not to know too much because you may trouble. You may ask questions, and the last thing that you want to do in a dictatorship is to ask questions. They can tell you whatever they want. They can give you any kind of information. They may tell you that media is wrong, and what they do is that they just change media. They just any channel of communication from the government was taken by the military, so they will tell you what their reality was, and you better follow that. So I remember spending nights. There was bombing in many different places in the city, and spending nights under our beds with my siblings. And my parents would say that it was our way of playing a game at night. You know, we were, instead of sleeping on our beds, we were sleeping under the beds just to keep us safe. But they told us that it was a game. The military also had the right to go into any home, and they will do these raids every once in a while, and get into homes of people. And if you had prohibited books or music, or you knew someone that they thought it was from the leftist, or against the military government, or not in agreement, they will take you. So I remember my parents having all of these fun music and books from everywhere. Whitman, do you know Walt Whitman? Okay, he was prohibited. His books were prohibited. So I remember my parents just getting this big plastic bag, and we had this big garden, and they will dig a hole at night and put whatever they thought could be bad, and just put in this plastic bag, and put the bag in the hole, and cover the hole, and put something on top of the hole so they didn't see that it was dirt removed. But when you are a kid, you think that is normal. I mean, men couldn't have a beard. I think that you went to jail you were taken by the military because we have known each other since we were in high school. So we are high school sweethearts. So he had this beard, and the military will take you. And especially if you were young, you were at high risk of being taken. But in the meantime, when you are 12, 13, 14, you really don't. You think that what you're living is normal. I mean, that's how life is, right? So what happened is that more and more people were starting to get taken by the military, thinking that they were terrorists or were against the regime. So what they did is that the military had this machinery of these places where people were, once they were kidnapped, they will not go to a normal jail. They will put them in these detention centers, illegal detention centers. And then families wanted to know what happened with their children, with their brothers and sisters and spouses. And the military will have there is no paper trail. There were no bodies either. So what happened is that it was very interesting, and this is another paper that I was working on, that whomever went up and asked questions about the disappearance of these people will get killed or will get disappear themselves. So asking questions was not a good thing. But there were two groups. Well, initially it was the mothers of Plaza de Mayo. That mothers using, because as I mentioned, in Latino culture and in many cultures, one of the sacred ways of being gender roles is to be a mother. So if you question the government about the whereabouts of your loved ones that were disappeared, from a political standpoint or any kind of social standpoint, you risk being disappeared. But mothers used their gender roles as mothers to have the right to inquire about their loved ones. So an organization was created, and it was apolitical, because if you belong to a political party, you would be disappeared. So this group, the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo, came up. And why Plaza de Mayo? Because they did not question, they did not ask, they did not say anything. What they did is a group of mothers, initially they were about 5, 6, 10, and then it grew. They will put a white handkerchief on their heads, and they will have a sign with a picture of their loved ones, the person that was missing, the name, the date of when this person was born, the age, and when he was disappeared from where. And they will just hold this sign and walk around the pyramid of freedom and justice, which is in the center, in front of the Palace of Justice, the Pink House. And they will do this every Thursday at 3 p.m. For decades. So, and it was their way of bringing awareness to what was going on in the country. It was the most effective way of also getting international press attention, and that helped change issues. So that was the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo. But then the abuelas, the grandmothers, also started their organization as well. But the abuelas were not only looking for the missing sons or daughters, they were looking for the grandchildren, who many times were taken away as well. So the military had this way of putting the children up for adoption for good families. So they will take the children from these families and erase their identities. The other thing is that they also took women who, out of all these thousands of people who were taken, many of the women were pregnant, and they gave birth. So they kept the women alive until they gave birth, and then they killed them. Kept the children, and the children were given into illegal, adoptions. So the abuelas of Plaza de Mayo, what they did is that they generated, I don't remember, do you remember the names of these? They generated genetic banks. So for anybody who was, the grandchildren of the disappeared, it would be 45 right now, 48, 45, something like in that range. So what they did is that for people who were questioning their beginnings, their upbringing, their adoptions, for people who never knew that they were adopted, but they knew that something was really wrong, they could go to this center where they were working with DNAs of the parents and the grandparents, etc., and they could have a test done on themselves. And then if these people wanted to have these tests done, then they will match those results with the potential pool of mothers and grandmothers who were looking for their missing children and grandchildren. And they found the grandchild number 136. they have identified 136, grandchildren. So the work that the abuelas, the grandmothers, did was to generate these scientific method to generate this space for, to find biologically connections between these, adults now, but children then, with their original families. And it's, I think that their method was used in many other countries around the globe, because it was highly effective. I mean, the idea of DNA matching, they had really good scientists working for them. So I don't know what you have seen or if that helps you in understanding the play.
What you said is like, this is the only time like being a mother was kind of beneficial.
Yeah.
You didn't say anything, you could march and
Right.
make it aware.
Right.
Otherwise, you're only. And when you said they kept a female who was pregnant, they would allow her to complete the pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
Find an appropriate home for the child,
Yeah.
and then the mother would be disappeared.
Right.
Yes.
And the child will get a new identity,
Yes.
and a new papers, birth papers or something like that in most cases. So it took physical anthropologists, biologists, all kinds of people, a huge team of people to working in, helping these grandchildren to find their identity. And it's an issue, this generation, it is an issue, and there's a lot of talk about this, because it's how dictatorships or, these kind of governments, what they do is that they not only affect the society here and now, this is affecting the third generation after that, after, we had the dictatorship. And it's very controversial because, well, it's difficult for many of these adults now looking for their identities to accept that those who raised them were not, not only were not their parents, but also that they paid or they were in agreement with, such a terrorist government. So they were pretty much taken from the mother and appropriated by these people. So they called about these families who adopted them the appropriators. But there is a huge issue with issues of identity of these individuals who really question who they are and that they live a lie. And it's a huge issue this time in the country, going through that. You're welcome.
Okay.
I'd like to find out what happened under Perón, and the reason I asked you that, because Evita had so much power. Was there any difference as far as the female sex was concerned under Perón's regime?
How much time do you have? Okay. Evita is a big myth, right? And it has the musical, and everybody is so much in love with her, and they think that it's the Frida Kahlo of Argentina. And this is my view. This is my personal understanding. I read and I lived. My dad was a Peronist, and he loved Evita. Everybody loved Evita because she was so good with the poor and the needy and all that. The reality is that Perón was a military person, and he had these wives, right? So he used every single possible way of affecting power over certain groups of people. I think that Evita was, this is what I think. I don't know, I have not met her at all, but maybe she was a good person, and somehow, in some part, she thought that what she was doing was the right thing to do. But in reality, she was valued because she was useful for Perón at the time. I mean, she was, how do you say peón? Do you know? Pawn? in chess. She was a pawn. She was used for that. She was ill. I mean, she died of cancer. Her illness was used for for getting more being liked by the masses. So she was. I think that she was used. I think that halfway she knew what she wanted. She liked power very much, and she liked jewelry, and she liked money, and she did not live the lives of the poor people that she advocated for. Well, that was decades ago, but I think that she was used as a I mean, it was one of the first instances, I think, in which the gender role of a woman as a powerful mother that was good to everybody, was giving person, but that was used politically. I don't think that in terms of the value of women were valued as long as they were of service to men, nothing else. Sorry, I feel like Evita.
I had a question for you about your methodological choice. I thought it was really interesting to hear about narrative inquiry. I enjoy that myself. But, so many folks who are in social sciences still feel pressured to either consciously or subconsciously to sort of move towards scientism, right? And to sort of explain the social world in, hard facts and rigor, which is a very masculine approach to how one understands the world. Although now we're in a post-truth society, and what are facts anyway? But anyway, I just wondered if you could talk about your choice to use narrative inquiry and sort of how that's received by other people in your field and in your discipline, and sort of how that methodological approach is viewed. And
well, that was a process. Actually, when we were graduate students, let me tell you about our story pretty much. We were graduate students in Providence, Rhode Island. And we got pregnant, and our daughter was born. So at the time, I decided to stop at a master's degree and then do my PhD later, just after the baby was 2 or 3 years old. Little we knew that life takes you places. And so we ended up in Kansas, at Kansas State University. So I knew at the time that I wanted to work with the testimonies of Latina students in college, especially first generation Latina students in college. And so at Kansas State, I decided, I was a full-time administrator over there. I did different kind of jobs. But at the time, I decided to start my PhD. I said, well, this is my interest. I've been working with my Latino groups and minority groups, for years now. So I want to finish my PhD. I mean, I came here to do a PhD, and I need to finish it. Plus, my daughter was getting into college, and I really needed to graduate before her. So, so we did that. Yeah, time passes. So, so I was not clear about how to do my dissertation, and Kansas State is a very large institution with many different possibilities, but it's a very how do you call it, traditional university. So it was not easy to find where to do my PhD, and then in what? There was no psychology. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, so the College of Education had a PhD in curriculum and instruction. And actually what it was is that they allowed you to, they gave you the bones, and then you fill the meat with the courses that you wanted to take, and then you have the PhD in the area that you're interested in. So that was, it was good that I found that. But after much thought and trying to work on that, I decided that life stories was, life narratives, oral narratives. There's so very little written about Latina women in college, and whatever is written is usually from a majority culture view of Latino culture as lacking something. So I couldn't find a lot of material. And I found this wonderful advisor, Kayan, and she said, well, oral stories, life narratives is completely okay. Let's look for ways of fundamenting, of supporting your interest in doing oral stories as a possible, as a research method, right? So I did a lot of digging into that. And what I found is that either a lot of material from literature, creative writing, or psychology. So I was taking from different parts. It wasn't an issue with my advisor, but it was an issue with the committee. Just what kind of research method I wanted to use. So I had to do a lot of massaging and explaining and supporting with bibliography about why did I want to do that. And now some years afterwards, life stories is a very, is an accepted method in the social sciences for doing research. So it was not an easy. It was not, again, if you have the right advisor, things will go. My first advisor was not the right one, so then I got her, and we're friends. We just published an article together, so including life stories. But yes, you're absolutely right. It's not something that is easy to use, and people tend to look for. They want numbers, they want percentages, they want quantitative data, and mine was a qualitative study as well. So, thank you.
If anyone in the upper balcony has a question, please come down. Okay. Oh, Anil.
Thanks. I'm following on. I'm wondering what you think of Cristina Kirchner. So it's often said you won't have equality till you have women as mediocre as many of the men that end up running countries. And she certainly wasn't. She didn't cover herself in glory. So I'm wondering what happened to the rights of women while she was president.
Okay, Sunday morning. It's not even noon. I had only one cup of coffee, okay? So, what happens is interesting because Argentina had women presidents. And I think that in the reading that was done before my lecture coincides with what it was said when women were looking for the right to vote in the United States in the 1900s. That someone asked, women need to vote this way or that way. And someone else goes, well, I don't care, what women will do with their vote. They're not different from men. It's the same thing. So there will be good women, bad women. There will be women who are interested in one party, in another, women who are corrupt, others are not. It's not the fact that they're women, it's the fact that they're people. So whatever they do with, the power that they have is up to them. In the case of Cristina Kirchner, it's interesting, and I don't know how much you know about Argentinian politics. I've lived here for 29 years, so that means that I follow whatever is in the news. It is interesting because on one hand, when there are women presidents, and her husband was the president first, and then I believe that she went for the presidency as a second term, like following his. There was during that time there was a lot of advancement for social causes in Argentina related to including issues dear to gender issues in society. I think that many of these things we need to appreciate. As a president, she's a very controversial figure, and actually she's under investigation for ring of corruption that goes beyond whatever anybody can think of. And she was pretty much not only participant. She was one of the heads of this corruption system, I think, and it's pretty proven that it's that way. But But beyond any kind of, anything related to corruption or how she led the country or what she did, she was criticized for, and the same for Evita from now, looking backwards, not only for being president, but also for being a woman. So she has been criticized for things that the men presidents were never criticized. And this is clear everywhere. I mean, if you look at our campaigns here, our political campaigns here, same thing. It's not about whatever ideas you have. It's about what you wear, how you behave, how your face looks, whether you had implants or not. I mean, these kind of things. So, so I think that in the case of women presidents, they have to deal with an extra layer of resistance than men. But Cristina Kirchner, again, I mean, we can spend the afternoon here talking about Argentinian politics. And now we have an election coming up, and I think she's running again, right? So we'll see.
You talk almost exclusively about the dictatorships, the military, the politics. How did religion play into this? Did religion have anything to do with it, nothing to do with it? Why?
What do you mean by religion? Beliefs? People's beliefs? Or
does Argentina have a religion that most people subscribe to?
Yeah, it's mostly Catholic.
So how did the Catholics deal with this? How did the military deal with the Catholics? Were they colluded? Were they separate? How did that play into all of this?
Different levels. I mean, the Catholic Church in Argentina is quite controversial. And it's pretty much on the right side of stuff. But that has to be taken with a grain of salt. During dictatorship, the people in power in Catholic Church were in support of the military, of course. And they helped in very controversial endeavors directly. But then you had the substructure of those priests, people who worked with the poor, who worked with the communities, who really wanted to help. So it was like an escission, would you say, between the higher power of the Catholic Church and those. Many times those priests were the ones who helped families hide and everything, But yes, it is a Catholic country, and because of how the Church, I believe that because of the behavior that the Catholic Church had during dictatorship, that many people just moved away from the Catholic Church. Sometimes it was just shameful. Yeah.
If you had a large microphone, what would you like to tell men all over the world? And what would you like to tell women all over the world?
Oh, again, I didn't have my second cup of coffee yet.
That's later, yeah.
I won't tell men or women one thing or the other, because I think that there is a spectrum, right? It's not only men and women, but everything in between. So people are, they're very different from each other. And I think that, I don't know, what I do on a regular basis, I think that equity is what works the best, not equality, but equity, where, different people have different needs. And just to understand that everybody's a person and that we have the right to coexist. So we need to really work together. And we have embedded structures of power within our societies. And even ourselves, even people who are very trained in issues of gender, race, ethnicity, many times, because of the way the society is structured, we behave in ways that we don't realize that we are, underscoring some people or undermining, some people. So I think that reading, getting educated, listening to what others have to say, and listening to groups of people who are, consistently oppressed is important, because by doing that is the beginning of understanding what needs to be changed. So, so gender roles are, in most societies, are very patriarchal. And that is very difficult to change. Many times when, in some institutions, even in Argentina, when we have worked extensively, when we go back, Argentina is a country of immigrants, but it's a country where the color of the skin dictates a lot. So we have worked with universities that supposedly work with people from underprivileged backgrounds. And when you look at the group of people who are in charge, are maybe there are some women, they're mostly men, and they all look white. They're all white skin, and these people are from middle to upper class. So it's coming to the institution and saying, well, your students are this, but you're this. So what you need to understand, you need to evaluate what's going on in that institution, because obviously there is no connection between the people that you're serving and who thinks what these people who are being served need, and there needs to be some change in here. So it's going beyond, what I will tell women or men. I think that it's not about individual agency. It's not about only what you can do. I mean, change starts by a group of people thinking that something can be changed. But at the same time, I think it's most important to take a look at the structures of the society we live in and how they dictate who does what, and question that to see how we can make this more equal, or work with equity for everybody. And that is the most difficult thing to do, because it's not a menu, or it's not a what do you say? It's not that something that I can tell you, well, do A, B, and C, and then everything will be fine. I think that it's a decision about what kind of society you want to live in. And it should be a discussion among all the people that live in that society to decide how to do it. So individually, you need a lot of individuals to create a community for change, but only one person cannot do it. It will have to be, a group of people doing it. And I'm talking about educational institutions because this is what I know the most, where I've been involved the most, and the educational institutions are the ones that change the slowest, because the structures are very rigid.
One last question, and I think I'm going to ask it. Basically, they say it takes a village to raise a child. We're talking about community, and as you were talking, I was thinking about, I'm an immigrant also, having come with my family when I was 11. But in my family, dinner table was not a real discussion. It wasn't a time in which to validate children's experiences. And I'm thinking, wow, that really took an interesting toll. And fortunately, my siblings and I have moved far beyond how we were raised. But I guess as we're talking about narratives of both our girls and our boys, how can we best help them create and affirm their narratives?
Oh, I think that conversation at all levels is a good way of doing this. Listening to them is one way. But I always tell my students, they're older than children, but I always tell them, I created this class at Columbia called Women's Life Stories. And it was taught, I taught it last semester for the first time, and people loved it. And it's a class that I also created at Kansas State before. And I always tell them, it's fine because I teach it in the fall. So Thanksgiving is a wonderful time. Because, you always go back for dinner, and they're all sitting at the table, and people are talking. And then here you have the uncle who's going to tell the same story that he has been telling for, decades. Okay. It will be, someone else just telling this story, and you say, oh, here we go again. How many times do I have to hear this? Write that down. Write that down. Explain. I mean, the kids, it's a wonderful time for the kids to talk to those family members because we're not going to be there for life. And I'm the last one. I'm the oldest one on my side of the family alive. My parents are deceased, my uncles, my aunts, everybody. I'm the only one. And I didn't live in Argentina for 30 years, so there are plenty of stories that are lost because nobody wrote them down. Nobody did anything with that. So, it's now, nieces and nephews that are much younger, then we have to tell these stories because they need to know. So I think it's a two-way avenue. On one hand, listen to those stories that are being told because they're foundational of the families, of your origins, of the tradition of what you live. These are so important. These mark you. I mean, I remember, I will give a lot of what I have to listen to some of the stories that my grandparents, who were deceased like for 30 years, told me. I mean, I will just die to listen to them again. And you reconstruct them the way you can. But those stories are important because they make not only who you are in relationship to others. So it's that connection with others, knowing that you belong to a clan, a group of people. And that story, even though it may not be yours as a child, it will be that child's story when that child grows up. It will share that story. It will incorporate that story into who they are, right? And also listening to the stories because sometimes, kids tell stories in very particular ways. It's much more, happens in a second, in 5 minutes, and then they leave. But it's also how you incorporate their telling of the stories in this communal story that belongs to that group of people together.
Thank you very much for coming today, Gabriela. Thank you.
Thank you.